Welcome to the Advanced Sports Analytics Show here on RotoGrinders. I'm Jordan Cooper, aka Blenderhead, Blender HD. Hopefully, on top of you on the GPP leaderboard for this final Week 17 of the NFL regular season. Join with me, as always, the man behind the model at Advanced Sports Analytics. It's Stewart Gibson. Stewart, it's where I'm getting to the point where I'm getting sick of you now, right? 17 weeks. 17 slates. Obviously, we had Thanksgiving. You had some Saturday stuff going on. It's been a wild ride with correlation, right? Where week 17, you have to admit, is correlated with one of the most variant weeks of the year. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I mean, and I think I've discussed kind of our focus on player-specific correlation. It does feel like you kind of have to throw that out the window for week 17 and just kind of assume, positional standards, because there's so many guys who are going to be playing in roles that they haven't filled at any point this year. There's, wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 3 correlation that is, completely different if the wide receiver 2 isn't, there's so many kind of variables that are different for week 17, such that, patterns and trends that we've seen between players, maybe even their opponent, probably can be kind of thrown out the window. And I think probably just safe to assume, kind of our positional baseline correlation between players as they kind of shift and move through different roles.
Well, we have a large slate. It's 15 games. We're not going to go through necessarily game by game. I know the normal format. Let's start at the highest total and go down to the crap ones. But I think it's wise to think of this slate much more holistically, because we have totals that are high, that of teams that may not be worth stacking, teams that may not have their starters play for the whole game. So, I mean, motivation, if you listen to shows this week, a lot of people will be talking about motivation in fantasy football. We have a lot of teams on the slate, more than you would expect for 30 teams, that at least one team in each game is motivated to win to some extent. But obviously, these are professional, football players. I mean, they're going to go on the field. They're fighting for jobs. They're fighting for new contracts. They want to put up stats. He got, records that they may look to get. So how does one, Stewart, try to model motivation into it? Because I view it much more simple. Maybe I'm wrong, but wouldn't motivation, quote unquote motivation, and the fact that teams may be putting out subpar, starting lineups, wouldn't they already be factored in the Vegas team totals and the spreads? Because I mean, we see like the Steelers are a 10-point underdog to the Browns, because basically the Steelers aren't going to play Roethlisberger and stuff like that. You have the Chiefs. I mean, the Chiefs have a 20-point implied total. We don't ever see that, because obviously the Chiefs are resting their starters. So do we necessarily care about motivation when we just go by the most efficient number in all of sports, which is the betting lines for closing lines for NFL?
Yeah, I mean, I think Vegas would handle some of that. And I think, I've been following as kind of populating our top score probabilities, have seen that with teams like Pittsburgh, Kansas City, Buffalo. I haven't seen indication that Allen will sit, but their total, to me, I know they're playing Miami, but seems to be at a level that indicates that, there's, suspicion that Allen might not play. So yeah, I mean, I do think Vegas will handle some of that, but, I do think there are instances where there are teams that have maybe announced that they're going to play their starter, either playing in like a low to medium motivation game, but maybe if, the game goes a certain way in the first half, I do think there are some spots where, there is risk of teams changing up their, pulling their quarterback at halftime, pulling their lead receiver or running back at halftime, stuff like that. So, I mean, from a projection standpoint, I think maybe we'll try to be a bit conservative in some of our like market share projections. So, trying to avoid like, Tennessee, for example, I think they have high motivation to win. Houston has low motivation, but if Tennessee, blasts out to a massive lead, I could see, we might want to avoid projecting like running back market shares that are, excessively high, just because there is, I think, some, there's some risk. There's, if we're kind of median projecting, maybe the median projection assumes that like Henry gets 70-80% of touches, but the mean projection might be that, there are kind of these, routes, maybe 25 percentile, 25th percentile, lower 10th percentile, where, Henry gets, pulled at halftime or, early in the third quarter. So, I think we'll try to be a bit conservative in some of these share projections, and that, should flow through to, overall projections. Maybe some of these quarterbacks that are in, low-ish motivation, or maybe in games where, an early indication, early kind of winning outcome might encourage teams to bench or maybe be more conservative with their starters. We might impose some sort of, coerced, like, reduce quarterback production by like, 10-20%, something like that. So yeah, I hope that gives you a sense of how I'm thinking for us to handle it.
From a mathematical standpoint, it would be, even though that the median may be the same as, like, you're viewing it just like it would be any other slate, that right. It's less likely to be a normal distribution and possibly more likely to be a binomial distribution.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to people listening going, oh my God, they're going to talk about math. But it's more of the fact of, like, in a normal distribution, you get that nice bell curve.
Yeah.
But
right.
let's say like Derrick Henry, like, I'm just using Derrick Henry as an example because obviously he's the lead running back for the highest total team. The Titans need to win. It's a 56.5 total. The Titans have a 32 implied team total. Dalvin Cook is sitting. So like the high price running back is basically, Derrick Henry projects like God, even in the blitz, and Derek Hardy hates Derrick Henry. That if the Titans end up getting a 3 touchdown lead by the half, and let's say it's not even, maybe Henry has 1 touchdown and 80 yards, but they have 2 touchdowns in the air, like, it's quite possible that Henry, like, maybe Darrell Evans comes in, and unless the Texans come back, like, Henry just sits there and waits so you see these, so the median could be in the middle, but like you have like results where he either busts out for a lot or doesn't play. Like, you want to have a situation where he may only get 10 carries or also 30 carries, and it's not normal in the way that you would look at it. I mean, it's a weird way of putting it, where a guy could have the same median, but the distribution for these types of scenarios may change versus a normal week 8 regular season game where like Henry would just go until like the last series, even if they're up 3 touchdowns, because they still want to win. It's the middle of the season and whatever.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I have a hard time deciding exactly what kind of the true distribution would be. I think it, could be binomial. It could be like kind of right skewed, where it's got this long tail, and I don't know how this camera orients, but to my right, a long right tail, right? There's kind of this lump of data points that are kind of at a Henry floor. Yeah, I don't know. So
I'm just saying more likely. I'm not saying to be perfect, perfectly normal, perfectly binomial, perfectly this way, perfectly whatever way. It's just that it's less. I would say it's less likely to be normal. I think that's a better. It's less likely to just be a normal bell curve, normal distribution.
Agree 100%. So yeah, I mean, going back to your question, yes, I think Vegas should handle some of that stuff at kind of the game level, but at the player level, I do think it does make sense to consider kind of what players are likely to be pulled, and maybe being a little conservative on their projections. Whether you want to be conservative on just the final kind of DraftKings or FanDuel projection, or like the approach we take is kind of trying to be conservative on like target share, rush share, air yard share projections. and letting that flow through to the projection. So,
How about the other side of games? Because we're talking about teams that either are motivated to win, and typically they're going to be favored in these games. So we're looking at the Titans. We're looking at the Packers. We're looking at the Colts. We're looking at the Buccaneers. Obviously, all the NFC East teams, even though the totals are a little bit low.
yeah.
How about on the other side? Like we take a look of the Titans need to win. They're playing to win. They have the highest implied team total. The Texans, there's really nothing to play for. I mean, you take a look at the Packers are playing the Bears. I mean, I guess the Panthers against the Saints want to win for playoff seeding, and the Panthers have nothing to play for. So, like, how are you treating projections as far as the teams that, like, the Texans say that Watson's starting and they're playing like it's a normal game, but I mean, they could say one thing and they could do another in the second half.
Yeah, I guess I would be less inclined to think that like teams that have low motivation but announce some plan to, play their starters or, whatever, play their starters. If they're losing and have low motivation, I would just guess that, I don't know, it seems unlikely, bar from maybe like just a quarterback that's getting really beat up in the back. Like, seems to me like you would think that the players' roles and kind of shares, whatnot, would I guess be more consistent and there'd be less need to be like really conservative on, say, like projecting kind of a Brandon Cooks target share. But because there's kind of low motivation, I think on the unmotivated kind of losing side, you suspect that Vegas will kind of take care of tempering projections for those guys, right? Because,
yeah, but they're doing it for the team, Stewart. So, like, for instance, we have like the Texans. We'll use it because it's the highest total game by far, 56.5.
Yeah.
So, because when we think in terms of building lineups, to get into to DFS, is that a lot of times we're stacking, a lot of times we're running it back, a lot of times we're doing stuff like that. So, if I'm, let's say, playing Derrick Henry on one side and I want to play a piece of the game on the other side, or if I'm playing Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams, like those types of things, and I go, okay, well, should I run it back? Well, it's quite possible that Brandon Cooks maybe doesn't see the second half. Maybe, Chance Hanson's out there and whoever their fourth, fifth practice squad wide receiver, whoever's active for the game. So would you be more inclined? I'm thinking in terms of this, like from a DFS construction perspective, that on a week like this, maybe I'd be less inclined to do the run backs because the least motivated team in the fourth quarter has less likelihood of having the players that the season's over. Why get this guy injured? Types of things, and you're more likely to see the Texans just win 38-7 than need like a run back in order for that game to go back and forth like that. So I think that in GPP, I'm actually more likely to just zero run back a lot more than I would normally do.
Yeah, no, I agree with that 100%. What I was saying is I think there is, and it's player to player specific, with kind of the age, general health, and kind of how a team's going to handle it. But I guess what I'm saying is I think there's more fragility in the roles of highly favored teams that either have somewhat limited motivation but are kind of planning to proceed as normal, or have high motivation but pending, a massive blowout could, remove their starters. Or I think there's fragility in the roles of those guys. I think there's less fragility in teams that are like unmotivated from a role standpoint. Like, Cooks, because of his injury history, might have, Watson, because he has kind of had this track record of getting so, just obliterated by defenses. I think these are examples where, maybe I could see the Texans pulling them, but, like just David Johnson versus Derrick Henry, running back versus running back. Like, to me, there seems to be like more fragility in Henry's role versus Johnson's role. However, the low total of the Texans is naturally just going to drag down projections of players on that team such that, yeah, I'm in total agreement with you. I think that, in these games where there's a massive mismatch in motivation, Texans, Titans, a good example, Indianapolis, Jacksonville, right? Like, yeah, I think these are good spots. I mean, we talk about, with Jets, being concerned about like, not wanting to bring back Jets players, and that's not so much from a motivation standpoint, but just from like a talent gap standpoint. But yeah, I do think there is like an interesting kind of motivation gap to consider. Like I think bringbacks are probably viable in games where teams' motivations are matched, and the other projections and kind of metrics that you're considering make sense. But or games where teams are kind of equally unmotivated. Like I think you had a really great call last week with Houston Cincinnati, where the thinking is like, oh, we don't want to play unmotivated teams, but if both teams are highly unmotivated, yeah, it could show on the offensive side as teams just aren't really putting their best foot forward and not putting up points. But it could also, motivation could be lacking on the defensive side and allow high scoring environments. So I do think some of these games where there's equivalent motivation level, but on kind of the low or unmotivated side, could be in play. I think there's one game in particular that I have circled as kind of two unmotivated teams that, from what I gather, are planning to play their starters. So
I think we're going to be agreement on that game. I think we'll get to it.
Yeah, sure.
On the other side, before we get to start mentioning some games, because that's what people come, oh, what games do you stack? How about on the other side of the spectrum, where we have two teams that are highly motivated to win, but the total's low? So like we have Cowboys, Giants, right. NFC East is, they're battling for that. And we also have the Cardinals, Rams, who quite possibly is a game between two backup quarterbacks, but they're both those teams, if they win, they're in. So like, that's going to be like the most competitive game, but it's also 40.5 total. So like from a motivation factor, I think like for instance, in soccer, because I play soccer DFS, when we have these group stage games and in these European competitions, that motivation is a very big factor. Like when a team must win, they tend to, screw defense. We're going balls to the wall. And a lot of times you roster those types of players in DFS. But in these games, like you still have to go by the betting lines to some extent. I know Cooper Kupp is going to be out. So like you have Robert Woods, but Goff is not going to be in. It's quite possible Murray doesn't play. So like the total just reduces the projection on these players so much for a 15-game slate that you would have to say that even though the teams are motivated, that it doesn't necessarily mean like, oh, this is the game I have to stack.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is naturally a want to equate motivation to like projectability or kind of expected fantasy production. And at least in these two games, and I think probably in general, like I actually am not sure I'd equate motivation to high motivation correlates to high fantasy production. I would say high motivation correlates to stability of projection, right? Like highly motivated teams. I mean, I think you just pointed out last week, I think like going back that Cincinnati Texan, this is just the counterfactual, right? Like highly motivated teams are likely to also try really hard on defense. They are, especially if there's backup quarterbacks or kind of second string receivers as starting receivers, they might be inclined to play more conservative than loose. So yeah, I mean, in these two games in particular, I'm not really equating motivation to, opportunity for fantasy goodness. I'm really equating motivation to stability of, the environment. And as of right now, Vegas projects these environments as pretty bad scoring environments. So,
but basically the standard deviation of the game,
shrinks,
is lower. I mean, it's similar to NBA. In NBA DFS during the playoffs, like the projections are typically extremely good because you know that the stars are going to play the whole. I mean, like the minutes stability outside of a blowout is going to be like they're going to play as many minutes as they possibly can handle. They're not going to, oh, they'll let's get this guy involved in the game. It's like, no, they already have their rotation set and you're done. But during the regular season, you have we'll let the second unit close out the half, and because they're playing well and those types of things. So like the variance, the standard deviation of the players goes up. But in these games, yeah, both teams are motivated, which means you're more likely to see the starters the whole way through, right? So hence the projection is going to be less variant versus games where it's quite possible in the fourth quarter you see guys with very high numbers, wide receiver 68, and you go, who the hell is that guy? And you go, okay, well that's why the starting wide receivers projection was quite fragile.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think you're right. It's a fragility thing, not a, scoring kind of opportunity thing, at least in my mind. And, like you mentioned NBA. I mean, you see teams in the playoffs in NBA actually slow down pace wise. So, I mean, if I haven't really studied closely how pace is impacted by playoffs or kind of high leverage games. But if the psychology of just wanting to be slow and kind of methodical in, games of importance carries to NFL play, you would figure that's a bad scoring environment for both these games.
Okay, so game wise, we mentioned before 56.5 total. Titans at Texans. It's one of the few games actually that's indoors. We talked about Derrick Henry, probably going to be the chalkiest running back. I'm more inclined on a GPP slate to just say that Tannehill in the passing game gets it done. And to me, that's the only other. Either you're playing Henry as chalk, or you're playing the Titans passing game as chalk, or you're assuming the game duds. Like, is there a case to be made of playing the Texans stack with the Titans as the run back in this game?
I mean, I would say under normal conditions, yes. My concern is just like there's a really big mismatch in terms of motivation. And it's really, right? Like if the Texans don't care on offense and the Titans care a lot on defense, it seems like you'd be kind of fighting that, uphill against that narrative. I don't know. And, Vegas doesn't have a particularly high total for the Texans, and they're not like super priced down. I don't know. I think I'd be more inclined to kind of take Tennessee, of those two options, would prefer Tennessee passing as a leverage against Henry. I mean, we've talked about multiple times how, Henry at high ownership is kind of, not a good, not good opportunity to play him. And, I think that's because part of that is just because with a limited pass catching role, he does have somewhat, it's not like a limited ceiling, but relative to his price point, it is somewhat of a limited ceiling as far as his ability to achieve, some multiplier of his salary. And then when you factor in that there is kind of this probability that, he just hits a massive floor due to, some outcome that results in Tennessee, giving more touches to like Darrington Evans or, McNichols or what have you. It seems like there's pretty high risk there for Henry at his price. And if he's going to be massive ownership, figuring to go something like Tannehill Davis, Tannehill Brown, maybe even Tannehill Smith. I think for me, I would prefer that as opposed to doing like Houston side plus Henry or even Houston side plus, a Tennessee pass catcher.
Would you say that it's the same exists for the next highest total game? Vikings at Lions, 54 total. So this is indoors also. Vikings have a 30 and a half implied team total. The Lions have nothing to play for. Apparently Stafford wants to play. So we may get Stafford, we may get Daniel. We have Dalvin Cook, who's obviously his personal thing to take care of, so he's not going to play. It's quite possible Madison isn't going to play. Even if whoever the running back is that starts, whether it be Madison, Boone, Abdullah, they should get some ownership here. So do you? I view this game similarly to the Titans, where wouldn't the leverage be to play the Cousins, Thielen, Jefferson type of passing game? And like I said before, with these teams that have no motivation, I'm not compelled to run back any of these stacks. But if Stafford plays, I'd be more likely to for like a Marvin Jones or a Hawkinson.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the Stafford thing's pretty big because, Minnesota is a defense that, can be attacked. And I don't know, Stafford, at least to me, seems like a bit of a gamer. So, if he's out there trying and kind of rallying his troops to try as well, like, it does seem like it could be a decent spot for Detroit. But yeah, I mean, I think the only caveat with this game is that it's just like Minnesota has a lower total than Tennessee and is more expensive than Tennessee. Granted, there's no, alpha running back that the offense is competing with. But yeah, I mean, I think in general, I would be in favor of kind of being on this Minnesota passing side, and entertaining the idea of a Detroit run back kind of conditional on Stafford.
Right, salary may not be an option, may not be
That's
that big of a deal. I mean, we talk about salaries. It's like when some of these star players are sitting. I mean, we're not rostering Tyreek Hill, right? I mean, we're not. Some of these expensive, like Dalvin Cook's gone already, so we're going to get cheap options. Week 17, once we start seeing the practice reports come in on Friday and Saturday, we may see this guy's sitting, this guy's sitting, this guy's not going to play. And you look at the top half of the player pool and you go, where is everyone? And it's like, play whoever you want at that point. So, like, I'm not as sensitive to salary this week. And that also means that I'm not as sensitive to ceiling probability for salary when it comes to doing a stack like in a smaller field contest, doing a Cousins, Thielen, and Jefferson. Those the two 7K type wide receivers, because I still need raw points. And how many of these 3K, 4K guys that may come out of the woodwork are going to put up enough raw points? Their medians may look good, but maybe if the Vikings come out and win by 6-7 touchdowns, right? If the Vikings come out and win 41-3, or the Titans come out and win 38-7, or the Packers come out to, what else do I need? I mean, like I could the Buccaneers. We have 50 total. Buccaneers versus the Falcons. The Bucs want to win. The Falcons have nothing to play for. It's a 7-point spread, but who says I can't just do Brady plus Evans plus Godwin plus whatever? I mean, it seems like these two teams already faced each other like 2 weeks ago. I view this as the same way. I'm more likely to play the Bucs and not run it back with Ridley. I mean, like, and then once I'm not running back with Ridley, we have all these other high-priced wide receivers that aren't going to play or whatever. And it's like, I got to spend my money somehow. This is why I think Derrick Henry is going to be mega owned, because if the high-priced receivers on the underdog teams, like Devontae Adams will be owned in the high range, but you're going to have the money you have the money to play Adams and Henry. So I think a lot of people will. But I think the Bucs Falcons games is another game where if the Bucs win, like, I'll just stack the Bucs.
Yeah. Well, that Tampa Bay game last week was very interesting. I mean, Brady and Evans just went crazy in the first half, and I mean, pulling Brady by halftime was was pretty wild. I mean, it does seem, well, just based on that single data point, it does seem like Arians has somewhat of a quick hook for Brady, but yeah, hopefully Atlanta can keep this a little more competitive than Detroit. So I just want to go back quickly to the game before, because I was just thinking about the Detroit side and like Jones and also DeAndre Swift. I mean, do you think there is significantly like different fragility between like running back workload and kind of role versus wide receiver workload and role? Do you think there's a chance coaches, like, I don't know, running back to me just seems like such a grueling and kind of physically destructive position to play for a full season. I mean, do you think that would it be reasonable to think that, like, well, rookie running back playing his first full year, he has missed some time, but for the most part, I mean, has played a pretty full, season, very kind of high workload season. Do you think like there's more fragility in for some of these unmotivated teams to give their running backs more of a rest compared to their receivers? Or
No, I agree. I agree with that completely. I think for me, the fragility is on running backs and on older wide receivers.
yeah,
Like I'm talking about a guy like T.Y. Hilton, like Marvin Jones, like those types of guys, more or injury plagued,
Cooks to some extent. Yeah,
right, like that type of player. I mean, we're talking about fragility. We're not talking about, oh, I'm not going to play him because it's going to be just higher variance.
yeah,
So yes, but it could be the other way. Like that's why we called it fragile. It could be that's like, okay, rookie, go out and have the best game of your life because we have nothing to play for, so we'll just run, just go have fun, whatever. So it could work. It could work the other way.
yeah.
Can I guess what your favorite game is?
I mean, probably that game I alluded to as well, I mean, I'll just give you a hint, just two teams that have very limited motivation, but and they're super cheap and, have reasonable totals. Yeah, no, I think we're probably on this because I know you like also both these teams, independent of the fact that they're playing each other this week. So yeah, go for it. I think you probably got it.
Is it a 51 total?
I don't have the totals in front of me. Let
I'm
me
gonna
see.
make you look stupid by saying the game, and you go, "Oh, no, that wasn't what I was talking about."
Yeah, hold on, give me a
Is
sec.
it a 51 total with the 2.5 point spread between two teams that I don't know what they have to play for, but it's a 51 total?
Yep, yeah.
Yep. Okay, we're on the same, right? Of course.
And you can
You know me. I can't get away from the stack. I did it last week and it didn't work. I'm going to try it again against the Raiders defense. It's the Broncos and the Raiders.
Yeah.
51 total. Raiders with a 26.25 implied team total. Broncos with a 24.25 team total, which is more than like half the teams on the slate. 24.25. And like everyone in this game is cheap. Like, I mean, to me, it's lock plus, I do the same thing. It's lock plus wide receiver plus Fant,
Yeah.
right? And then you run it back with Jacobs or Waller, right? Or Aguilar or something like that. And there you're done. And then I wait. Oh, then it's a late game. Great. It's a late game. So that I sweat it the whole way through. And then I went, okay, now that it's 425, now my stacks come alive. And then it ends up being like 17 to 10. And my green number is poof or whatever. But I'll take a shot because this game is not going to be owned.
Yeah. And I think you could go either side. I mean, I'd be more than happy taking like Carr, Waller, Aguilar. Probably would, prefer Denver's just significantly cheaper, but I think I'd be fine with doing like Carr, Waller plus I don't know that I'd necessarily want to do double tight end, but Carr, Waller, Judy, Carr, Waller, Tim Patrick, Carr, Aguilar, Fant. I think there's there's a number of different ways you could do it. You could also obviously mix in running backs opposing the quarterback that you're playing. Yeah, I mean, I think it's very similar to that Houston Cincinnati game last week. Just two super unmotivated teams. Really, both defenses I think are pretty attackable.
The betting line's 51. That's the whole point I brought up in the very beginning of the show about, well, people are going to look at motivation and go, these teams aren't motivated. Maybe they'll do whatever. It's like, well, then why is it a 51 total? Like if it was a 43 total, I wouldn't have brought it up much. I would have said whatever. But I mean, we have two motivated teams in the Cardinals and the Rams, and the Eagles. We got the Eagles, Washington. We got tons of motivated teams, but like low totals. So the defense is motivated also. So that doesn't mean offensive scoring is going to happen. And I take a look at this game, and this looks like two teams that like they're just looking. They're looking forward to their off-season vacation. And that the defenders could be like, screw it, run by me, whatever happens.
Yeah, boy. I mean, a pretty unique build would actually be to go double tight end, Waller, Fant. I mean, two low-owned guys. Both. I think they're obviously tight ends, but I think two of the best kind of like run after catch tight ends. I think it would be an unlikely, build. I don't know. So let's see. Yeah, I mean, really Arizona, Los Angeles, and then the NFC East game are really the two games. I guess Green Bay, Chicago, to some extent, has two pretty motivated teams.
And that's a high total. That's a 51 total. Packers at the Bears, 28.25 for the Packers, 22.75 for the Bears. But I'm assuming that like the ownership in this game, the game is Rodgers Adams. I mean, like it to me that this is not the type of game where like I could see a ton of pieces. Like this is the type of game that maybe I play a secondary stack of Adams plus. You could do Adams Robinson. You could do Adams Montgomery. You could do. I mean, pretty much it's Adams and someone on the Bears, right? You do something like that.
Yeah. Cleveland has high motivation, but low total. Pittsburgh, no motivation, lowest total.
How about the Saints Panthers? I took a look at the Saints Panthers, and the Saints want to win the division or get a bye.
Some seeding implications.
Right. Obviously, the Panthers have nothing. That total actually came down. It opened at 51. It's now down to 47.5. But the most rostered player in this game is going to be Alvin Kamara. He's
Right.
9,500 now. But the Panthers are pretty cheap. The problem with this game, though, like this is the type of game I would go, I want to take Bridgewater +2 and then play Kamara as the run back. The problem is that both these teams play like two of the slowest paces in all of the NFL. So on a 15-game slate, do I want to take 4 guys on my roster at, this projects to have one of the lowest like play totals of the slate. So to me, it limits, although the Panthers are cheap, to me, the play total just kind of limits the ceiling here.
Yeah, I mean, they're cheap, but they have an extreme. I mean, we have them as a less than 1% chance at scoring the most points.
So you're saying there's a chance that we're.
There is a chance. We have them as 24th out of 30 teams. So like, yeah, I mean, they're definitely cheap, but to me, they just feel like better options that are similarly priced that just have kind of better spots like Denver. Even Houston. Well, Houston's actually expensive, but
How about the Ravens? We have the Ravens at the Bengals, 44 total, but I mean it's highly skewed towards the Ravens. 28.5 implied team total. Bengals 15.5. But to me, I mean it's the Ravens. So essentially, like you play Lamar. You can play Lamar naked. You can play him with Brown or Andrews or something. Like the Ravens are kind of always kind of boring to talk about because stackability of the Ravens is very minimal, and you're primarily talking about the quarterback, but they're motivated to win, and the Bengals are awful.
Yeah. Lamar's typically a guy I don't feel like I need to bring back the opposition just because he gets so much value from his running ability. Like he's not, one of these statue quarterbacks that like need a competitive game environment to kind of push their ceiling. Like he can get to, his ceiling performance, even if the opposition isn't pushing him. Actually like, unlike some of these other teams towards the bottom, Jacksonville, Pitt, Jets, I think like T Higgins is actually quite good. So, he could be a guy to consider bringing back.
You could, but I'm just not excited. This is not the type of week where I'm compelled to bring back. Doesn't mean I don't. It just means that it's not the type of thing that I'm looking for as a focus. It's if it happens, it happens. If it works out that way. Like I take a look at the Colts Jaguars and I'm going, 49.5 total. Colts need to win. 31.75 implied team total. Jaguars 17.75 team total. Problem with the Colts, hard to stack them because they go everywhere. The highest owned player in this game is probably going to be Jonathan Taylor and not the passing game. But the Jaguars are cheap and they have nothing to play for. And, LaVisca Chenault or DJ Chark. You could play Rivers with someone, Hilton, I guess, maybe, Pittman. I mean, it's not the reason why this game is unappealing is because of both teams have just a lot of pieces. And it's like, okay, you want to stack the game? Feel free to waste 50 lineups making all those combinations to make sure that you get the right one. Unless you just have obviously just want to say, I'm going all in on it's going to be Pittman Shark. It's going to be Taylor and Chenault or something. So like we see most weeks with the Colts, they have a high total, but like they show up high in your model, top team to score the most points, but from a DFS perspective, the distribution of their fantasy production just tends to be so wide that you rarely ever get like that ceiling fire emoji guy that's in the GPP winning line.
Yeah, no, they're obviously tough to pin down, and so is like Tampa Bay, but I think just the ceiling on Brady, Evans, Godwin, individually is just so much like, you sometimes are more willing to burn some lineups trying to like truly catch kind of lightning in a bottle. With Indianapolis, between Rivers and some of his receivers, it's like, you're burning a bunch of lineups to like, get like a, flicker. So it's just like, you spend a lot to get, you can potentially spend a lot of lineups and money to capture what I think is somewhat limited upside. So,
but it's okay for me to burn my lineups on the Drew Lock stack.
well, I mean, I think, I don't know. I think Locke has like a higher ceiling than, Rivers. I think,
but it's more the receivers. It's more the same thing of like, you have Patrick, you have Judy. Hamler's probably done, right? He got killed the last game. So at least that takes one receiver out of the. Then you got Deshaun Hamilton. He'll score a touchdown, and then you start flipping your laptop over. I mean, the Broncos aren't all that immensely different than the Colts.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just the combination of, at least in my eyes, their quarterback and like, pass catchers have slightly higher ceilings than the Colts. They're cheaper. They're likely to be lower owned. They're not like beating the Colts players by that much in any of these one categories, but they just seem to have, a step on, their kind of equivalent on the Colts side. And like, also, I think there's just more kind of even motivation levels or lack thereof in this specific game. I don't know, but
Are there any other games that you're looking at?
I mean, God, I feel like I'm kind of done with Seattle at this point. They have a respectable total, but are not super cheap. So I'm looking at it, but not that, with not much intrigue. Not really interested in paying kind of full price or slightly discounted Los Angeles versus, no Mahomes, Kansas City. I don't know. Be interesting to see, but like, I don't know. I just am not that interested in playing like Josh Allen for potentially, 2 quarters versus a pretty good Miami defense. So yeah, not really, to be honest. I do think, we kind of discussed the Arizona Los Angeles as kind of a highly motivated game that I'm not super interested in. I could be talked into a little bit of Dallas, Dalton with either Shepard or Ingram bring back. That's kind of a highly motivated. The total isn't great, but I mean,
would you rather on the other side? I think Daniel Jones has more upside than Dalton. I mean, that's just me. I'm looking at the projections that I'm looking at. But I mean, I highlighted that game a little because like it's cheap, and I think I think I could play Ingram, do something like Jones plus Shepard or Slayton plus Ingram, and then you run it back with one of the Cowboys receivers.
Yeah, no, I think that seems actually probably right. I Dallas just jumped to the top because they have, probably twice as likely to score the most points on the slate, but they're also, about $2,500 cheaper, if you're like looking at Dalton, Cooper, Lamb versus Jones, Shepard, Ingram. So yeah, I think that makes sense. And I like that Jones does have some running ability. So he's been the Giants, always in my sheets are kind of popping as one of the, high ceilings per dollar, but it's just I've never really considered them seriously because their total seems to be so low week after week. But no, I think it's feasible.
So, being that this is the last show of the year, show of the season, hopefully the show will be back next season, so we could go on another 17-week adventure of correlation and leverage, right? Because that's what this show is all about. I know on the YouTube thumbnail it says game stacks, but that's for the unwashed masses to not, because they don't understand the mathematical terms, right? So we just try to, flashy things, right? The little quarterback and the receiver, game stack. So what games to stack? And that's why people click on it. But what would you consider, Stewart, to be the one thing that you learned the most this season in the NFL? Not from an NFL perspective. I'm talking about from a DFS perspective.
I mean, I do think like at times I'm pretty price sensitive. I'm kind of hesitant to take on either teams that just have like, I think probably for tournament purposes, like throwing price sensitivity, not out the window, but just dialing back one's price sensitivity a little more. Something I think I've learned really in the past couple of weeks. I mean, it seems like we talk about Derrick Henry in one way or another so much, and not so much that I've learned, like how to handle Derrick Henry, but I think just understanding kind of the trade-off between ownership and the distribution of possible outcomes, and weighing those two against one another, and just understanding like if when a player reaches some kind of top 25th percentile outcome at certain levels of ownership, it's just it's obviously helpful. It's more helpful to own them than not, but in the grand scheme of beating out 99% of the field, there's potentially more value in kind of taking slightly unlikely or 40% kind of floors, and be willing to excel massively when player who's highly owned achieves some 40%, 30% floor that you don't have exposure to. I think I was listening to your course a lot at the beginning of the year, and just understanding like relative value of players, right? Like the value of a player that everyone else has. If every player has, if every contestant has a certain player, they offer zero relative value, and there's potentially more value in not owning a player that other people have that they're just going to miss on in a big way. So I think those were a couple things, but
right. But that's the biggest concept in GPPs, and that's how so many dead lineups exist in contests. I always say that the large field GPPs always have the most amount of dead lineups, and people take that as, oh, it's the casual Joe Schmo who like forgot to check to see if Julio Jones was out, so he's stuck in his lineup, right? Or lineups that you go, they left 4,000 on the table and they played Noah Brown for no apparent reason. Like, I'm not talking about those dead lineups, because there are a certain percentage of those dead lineups. They're not that high. That may be under 1%. I'm talking about the dead lineups of basically cash lineups. Basically, I listened to so-and-so and I played the best plays, a lineup that you'd see in double ups, those types of lineups. And that they're always cluttered somewhere around the min cash line, right? At best, like they're somewhere around there. And it's like, dude, like download the CSV. Sometimes on some leaks, you could find 10, 15, 20% of lineups that have those properties, have double up, cashed lineup, high medians, great medians, very limited correlation, limited relative value. And yeah, you'll bounce around. You'll get a 24th percentile outcome. Oh, great. You have 1.5x. Or they're somewhere in the 34th percentile and they just mitch. You'll see them all over there, but like the win equity is virtually nothing. I mean, like you're going to min catch a lot more, but it's going to be the only way that you win is that if it's a 330 point score, because like you have no relative value in your lineup. So like Stewart, that's essentially the lesson that you're learning, that you're more likely, it sounds weird to say, that you actually want to win, you want to profit less often. right? You want to build lineups that don't cash more often. To when the lineup that does cash, it doesn't just cash, it gets you a 10x, gets you a 20x, gets you 100, gets you obviously first place for $1 million. So that's the biggest lesson that you've had this year, and the biggest lesson that I've had was in very similar with price sensitivity. In like, I was always big into vomit stacks. Obviously, the whole course of this year, we've had such high totals and stuff that even I look at some vomit stacks and go, where's the ceiling on a slate this size with these totals? And in the back of my mind, comes back to what Brandon Adams even said on one of our first shows when he poo-pooed some vomit stack that I wanted to play, and he goes, "I'm just looking at the high total games, and I'll let the field make the mistake." And like sometimes I have to look at slates and go, I want to play the high total games, but maybe just play them in a different way instead of just going, let me X them out. Like let me just not even bother at all. I mean, I've done that before, but I'm less inclined. I'm more inclined to look at a high total game and go, well, everyone's gonna play it. And then I do some studying in results DB. And while it was the most owned game, the combinations with the third receiver or the tight end or something was like gave me enough leverage. Yeah, maybe I don't play the chalk running back in that lineup, but once I take the third wide receiver and then just not play the chalk running back, I do my analysis in the CSV and I go, dude, that would have been enough leverage for this contest. Like, so I could play the great game environments that are even chalky as long as I could build the lineup in a smart way.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm probably quite faulty of this. Is there's a tendency sometimes to try to get like too cute. You have some 4K wide receiver that you just love, and then you also have a 4.9. You got JD McKissick, who you think is kind of your ace in the hole, and you're like, all right, well, I'm going to play all my cute kind of pet plays in the same lineup, and I'm gonna be so different. It's going to be no ownership. And I mean, yeah, if all those hit exactly how you plan them out, yeah, you're obviously in a great spot. But the reason they're cute plays, the reason they're your pet plays, is because there are very, very realistic routes to that play not performing in kind of the most optimal way that you're hoping. And really, it doesn't take like lineups of 3 just like totally off the board cute plays. Like sometimes it just takes one cute play, and then some really good players that people just don't own because of price, or because there's some shiny piece that is drawing ownership away from what otherwise are like really strong plays. I think moving forward and kind of looking ahead to next year, I do want to try to focus on not trying to get too fancy, and not try to jam too many of these cheap plays or kind of off the wall plays that I think seem viable. And like, it's not so much that they're not viable, but it's just that counting on like 3 long shots, or even slightly unlikely shots to hit, it's just dangerous. You just set yourself up for just a lot of failure. So yeah, I don't know, something I think I want to think about.
Okay, well, I hope that we'll be back next year on RotoGrinders with the advanced sports analytics. So, Stewart, for people that obviously we still got the playoffs. I mean, we won't be doing shows, so I mean, you'll still have stuff for NFL during January, but obviously NBA is here, and you're doing NBA stuff. I don't know if you're going to be doing MLB stuff. So, kind of what's the 50,000 foot view, the 10-foot view for basketball, I guess.
Well,
for ASA going forward through, because the next time we'll be speaking, if we continue, we won't be back until September. So sell everyone on advanced sports analytics.
Yeah, so we'll continue kind of our program for football playoffs. Obviously, sans this show, but we'll be doing our weekly Substack, breaking down the playoff slates. We have started up our NBA content. We have projections. as well as, kind of data aggregation and visualization tools, which we rely heavily on in, the NFL versions of in our weekly Substack. And yeah, I mean, we do golf year round. We've been on a much welcome break from golf, but excited to start that back up. I think next week. Baseball, when that comes back, I actually really like our baseball product and projections. There's baseball, like, far and away, I think, is the sport with most accessible detailed data through open source Python stuff. So we're really excited with kind of how that shaped out last baseball season. We'll be doing the same this year. Yeah, so that's, I think, kind of the pitch, for sports, projections for all four, as well as kind of informative applications and data information sources. We also try to make all our raw data accessible for free. So that's, I think, something good to check out if anyone is interested in kind of using the NFL offseason to work on their modeling chops, or building some sort of tools that will help them for next NFL season. I think we encourage people to check those out for free. Yeah.
And if I had a Manscaped read, I'd say, how I like my projections raw, right?
Yeah.
I think maybe that's that may be the highlight to it. That's what says a lot about the DFS audience, that we'll do 17 weeks of top quality mathematical and theoretical analysis of slates, and people will remember the 7-minute long Manscaped reads more than that. But you could go to advancedsportsanalytics.com to check that out. AS Analytics DFS on Twitter. Stewart is Start Gibson. Follow him throughout the year. I'll be probably bugging him with some MLB and some NBA stuff throughout the course of the next couple of months. You can follow me, Blender HD, on Twitter. So feel free to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe on YouTube, sign up for RotoGrinders Premium, do all those things, and hopefully we'll see you next year on the Advanced Sports Analytics Show here on RotoGrinders.com.